We pledge to say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Welcome to The Pledge, the show committed to straight talking and fearless debate. This week, Nick takes up the fight of Sir Cliff. Michelle wants to talk about porn. Rachel tells us what men get up to in the privacy of the voting booth. And James wants special treatment for the nation's bankers. You can decide who wins their debate. But just remember that if it's not Nick, like a certain Mr. Trump, he won't accept the result and will say the system is rigged.
Quite right.
But first, it's me. Everyone agrees it's a disaster. Those are the words of the French Interior Minister on the way the fate of thousands of refugees in the so-called jungle in Calais have been handled by Britain and France. The camp has become a squalid holding ground for people attempting to get into Britain, among them hundreds of unaccompanied minors. And the British government has been relocating children in Calais to the UK at a pitiful rate. This week, around 20 arrived, with the Home Office saying it has plans to bring in around 100. Why should we help unaccompanied child refugees? Well, first of all, because international humanitarian law puts us under an obligation to do so. Many have family members in the UK, which gives them a right to be fast-tracked here. Secondly, because they are incredibly vulnerable. Europol says that more than 10,000 of these underage refugees have already gone missing, possibly in the hands of people traffickers. Instead of fulfilling our moral and legal obligations, we're dithering under the false impression that helping these victims of wars we've played a part in creating will somehow overburden our public services and our national identity. It's a sentiment that I believe history will not remember kindly.
You call them children. You've seen pictures of these so-called children, have you?
I knew you were going to go there. I saw the papers yesterday, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're not children. They need carbon dating, let alone dental checks. They're in their 30s, some of these people. They've got crow's eyes. They've got receding hairlines. The reason that the people... The Sun did a very powerful piece. There's a little boy called Daniel who's 9. He can't get to the front of the queue because guys in their 20s and 30s are literally forcing themselves to the front of the queue. Let's make sure we get it right first, Afua.
I'm going to show you a clip of one of the children in the camp who's being relocated to the UK. Just have a look at this.
Me.
Just have a look at this. Just have a look at this.
Everywhere line. For food line, for jeans line, for shoes line, for shower line, everything line. Sometimes I miss mom, sometimes I crying, not here, my family, no parents. I miss my mom.
You'll be surprised to hear, Nick, that I agree with you to the extent that I think it is really important, if we agree to take in child refugees, that they are children, because otherwise it undermines everybody's confidence in the system. But the reality is there are children like this boy, 9-year-olds, who are there in a desperate situation. There were reports about one 9-year-old who just said, there's nobody to put me to bed. It's heartbreaking.
I agree.
Now, the idea that a refugee can just breeze into Britain through a Home Office scheme with nobody checking their age is ridiculous. It's incredibly hard. These people flee with no papers, and there is a rigorous process.
How did those guys get in this week?
What puts you in a position to judge the age of a refugee?
I've got a pair of eyes. I've raised 2 sons. I know roughly when boys are around 19, 20, and I know when they're in their mid-30s. One of them's got a receding hairline. One of them looks almost as old as me.
I mean, I heard one of the charities that work in the camp saying one of the people that was pictured in one of the tabloids wasn't a refugee at all. It was meant to be an interpreter. The point is, we don't know. But there are people on the ground whose job it is to assess these people rigorously, and they have deemed them to be children.
When I heard about all of this, I thought it would be almost like the old Kindertransport, right? Those were trains. This would be boatloads of young boys and girls arriving. In fact, it's all young men, most of them pretty much 18, 19, some of them in their 20s. We've been sold a pup. Jack Straw saying yesterday, unless action is taken, the public will lose confidence in the asylum system. We have no confidence in the bloody system. It is hopeless. We're letting in 30-year-olds. You and I are on the same page to a degree. 9-year-olds, not a question. That's what Britain has been about. That's what Britain should be about.
Not just
29-year-olds,
not
clear
just
off someplace
9-year-olds,
else.
also 15, 16-year-olds.
And why all boys? Why all young men?
What puts us in a position...
You're basing this on exception rather than rule. Surely you're picking on a handful of exceptions, but Britain did say that we're taking 20,000 people. We're taking a pittance of 100 here and 20 here, etc. But I think it's people like you that pick one-off examples.
Not one-off, James.
But, OK, but what percentage?
Virtually everyone who got off that bus was in their 20s.
Are you saying it's 90% or 10%? What I'm saying is our system, the people we employ at our borders, surely, you know, I can't imagine they can't tell the difference between a 30-year-old... No, but my point is, it's an exception. So I think people like us having this debate, we just fuel the argument. You know, we had a part to play in this war. We created that problem in the first place. We made a commitment that said we're going to do something about it, and we're failing. We're not doing it.
So bringing in lots of single males in their 20s and 30s is going to help, is it?
I think people are not as stupid as you're making out. You quite rightly say that you can tell the difference between a 30-year-old and a 15-year-old. Yeah. I think the people we employ at our borders are not that stupid.
Well, how are these blokes getting in,
maybe
James?
one or two got through, but my point is, the point that Afua's making, which I agree with, we have a responsibility and we're failing the system. Now, just because a handful of people got in or there was an issue, for us to now, you know, to kind of not allow the people who deserve that opportunity, because when you're saying, because we're getting to this whole debate about, you know, we should be protecting our own and Britain can't do it and we're crowding the system.
The Mail did a good piece today, right? And they spoke to... That's a great
The Mail actually spoke in favour of bringing child refugees into the country.
No, they did a good job there. And they spoke to a very good job. They spoke to a care worker in Kent, a foster mother in Kent, who thought she was getting a 16-year-old. She reckons he's about 25, right? She feels physically intimidated. Yeah. He comes from a culture where there is no respect towards women. It's not his fault, it's just the culture in which he's grown. She is actually frightened for her safety and the safety of her 2 young children. This cannot be allowed to continue.
We all agree with you.
Nick, we all agree that it's been a presentational and a systemic, as it were, disaster, because it's clear that the system doesn't work. And when the system doesn't work, the pictures that are fed out to the world are absolutely disastrous, because it gives the impression that Britain is open to all young men who can pretend to be kids, who will come in as children and therefore take advantage of the Dubs Amendment, which says that unaccompanied minors will get preferential treatment. So the whole thing has been an absolute catastrophe, and it actually hides the reality, which is that it's only a handful of children, so-called children, and our obligation is actually much bigger, and we've got to bite a much bigger bullet than this as the weeks go on. But if everybody now thinks that these guys coming in are possibly threatening, they're going to go into the children's care system as adults, that is a real problem. And I think that why haven't we seen, we're talking about pictures, why haven't we seen pictures of children, the pictures you wanted to see, of little boys carrying satchels in overcoats? We needed to see those pictures, not the pictures of these hulking young men.
It's the fault of our system.
It's the system.
At the end of the day, we are criticising the system that we put in place, who are employed to do that job.
It's a hopeless system. Border Force needs to be remade.
The reality is there are up to 1,000 children in Calais. They've been there for a year.
Many of them. Because
we don't know
because there are 1,000 children. If this is what the definition
they've done a visual
is,
inspection of the whole camp, and it's 1,000 kids, 6,000
My
others.
point is, they've been there for up to a year. There has been no system for properly documenting, discovering the age, assessing the need of these people in the camp. Now, if that had been done, it would have been able to be a process in which we had a lot more confidence. But we're part of the reason this hasn't happened. We've all dug our heads in the sand. Britain's wanted nothing to do with helping these refugees. It's only been forced to.
Don't forget we're helping in the camps near Syria as well. So this is not. We're not just when we talk about our response, we can't just talk about what we're doing with these children. We're doing other things as well.
Our response has been to deliberately prioritise people in the camps in the region, which I understand, but on the basis that if we help people already in Calais, it sends a message that you should come here. The reality is these are children who've put their lives on the line to get here out of desperation. The idea that we can just ignore them.
Who are children? Because for me, nobody, you'll find anyone hard pushed to disagree with the sentiment that if there is an unaccompanied child, nobody would want an unaccompanied child anywhere, and let alone in this horrible camp. Like, most normal, decent people would not want to see that. But the problem that you've got is everyone agrees with that sentiment. But what's going on at the moment, it's embarrassing, it's laughable. You do see these, like, fairly well-grown men getting off of buses going, look at these children, and I'm sorry, they're not children.
They've got better beards than
None of
James.
us-
They've got better beards than James.
The problem is this is now being run by the tabloids, right? None of us are there. I haven't been there. I haven't been to the camp in Calais.
Well,
I
thank
haven't
God
been
for
at
the
the border.
tabloids. Thank
None of
God
us
for them.
know who these children are, how representative the hulking guy with the beard
Why aren't you praising the work
really
of the
are.
Mail and the Sun and the other
I
papers
just
for
did.
exposing
I
it?
just did.
Oh, okay, good.
The Mail spoke out in
How many
favour
children?
of
How
bringing
many
in
children
child
do you
refugees.
suppose are in? How many British children are in children's homes in this country?
I don't know the figure. off the top of my head.
3,162. Why aren't we doing something to help our own children?
I-
Why do we just sit
I am
and
the
this
first
is not
person to
about sitting in
advocate.
children's homes?
I'm the
This is
first
not about
person to
caring.
advocate
Why are
helping
we
children in
fostering
care.
22-year-old
It's not an
Syrian
either
men?
or. It's
Nick,
not
talking
either you
about
help children
refugees,
in care
not.
here. Or
It is
you-
with
or you
Nick.
help
It's either it's your
Clearly.
kids or someone else's
It's a
kids. And with Nick, it's
zero-sum
always
game.
Nick. Nick, there is a vacancy at the top of UKIP, you know.
No interest in leading UKIP. Thank you very much.
But I think that you shouldn't let... And everybody coming into the country should be understood who they are, where they've come from, are they genuinely in need of refuge and all the rest of it. And for me, I think it's a scary prospect that people are coming into the country when we do not know who they are, first and
I
foremost.
haven't been to the camp in Calais, but I do have some experience of the asylum system here. And I can tell you, it is the most rigorous process. Often it's the case that
I'm not allowed to show the pictures,
children
unfortunately,
who've been
for
trafficked
broadcasting at the
into
moment.
sexual exploitation have to go through a humiliating process where they are repeatedly interrogated about their age. There have been cases where they've been asked to have dental x-rays. And in fact,
Let's have those.
councils have refused to believe dental x-ray evidence when it's not gone in their favour, when it's proved that someone's underage. They've said, well, it's not accurate anyway.
So how did
The
these
idea
guys
that it's
come
a
in then,
solution-
Afua?
Yeah, if it's
Under
so
what
stringent.
system were these guys let in?
I don't know how many people have come in who aren't children, if any, and I don't know how representative the pictures in the tabloids are, but I do know that it's become a very toxic debate where instead of focusing on the fact that it's beyond dispute that there are unaccompanied children, we need to help them, we haven't been helping them, and instead of focusing on that, we're picking out these isolated examples of people that sitting here we might think look over age.
Yeah, we all lie about our age.
Look over
We
age.
must move.
I mean, I saw someone in the
sentence
Sun
if
who
you
looked
do.
like he wasn't a child, but I don't know if he's a
I could
refugee.
just say
and I
I'm
don't know where he came
embarrassed
from.
that we, made a commitment which was much smaller than the rest of Europe, and we probably said we'll take, 5 times less than everybody else. And even the figure that we committed, which was a terrible figure, we not even matched anywhere near that. We're talking about refugees, but it's not the refugees, it's the system that it's for. If we're sitting here today as a Britain, one of the powerful nations, and we can't get our borders of people who can differentiate between a 15-year-old and a 30-year-old, we should be embarrassed.
All right, to the other end of the age scale. Forever Tainted. No, not the title of his latest hit. Rather, how Sir Cliff Richard fears he will be judged until the day he dies as a result of the appalling police investigation into unsubstantiated sex offences. The singer is now suing the BBC and South Yorkshire Police, which, many of you will recall, chose to collude and bring the raid on Sir Cliff's Berkshire home live, complete with footage shot from a helicopter of detectives rifling through his possessions. Not my sort of daytime viewing. Sir Cliff talked of his 22-month ordeal at a meeting at the House of Lords this week as part of a campaign to guarantee anonymity for suspects accused of sex crimes. Broadcaster Paul Gambaccini shared his similar ordeal. His lasted 12 months. In a way, Cliff was lucky. His beloved sister Donna lived long enough to hear her brother had been cleared. Lord Bramall was not so fortunate. His wife died, never knowing that the investigation into alleged sex crimes involving her husband, based on the outlandish claims of a man now thought to be a fantasist, was just as unfounded. Surely what's tainted here is a system that allows these sort of witch hunts to continue.
This is in danger of setting a precedent, but I have a lot of time for your argument, Nick.
Whoa.
I have a lot of time for your argument because I believe passionately in the presumption of innocence. It's the absolute bedrock of our criminal justice system. And I agree that sometimes just being accused of a sexual offence is a sentence in itself before you've been tried by a court, and I think that's really worrying. On the other hand, I think we need to acknowledge the wider context here. It is still very difficult for people who've experienced sexual assault, especially as children, but all people, to come forward. Now, in cases where the alleged perpetrator is high profile, it's even harder for somebody who was abused to expect to be believed. And in many of those cases, I mean, you mentioned Sir Cliff, and there's Paul Gambaccini as well, but then there's equally Jimmy Savile. There are other cases where...
Hang on, I don't think we can have them in the same bracket.
No,
I'm going to be careful here.
the point, and I'm not comparing them because Cliff's been exonerated,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the point that I'm making is that there are people who have been found to have committed abuse, and had they not been named, had it not been made public that these people were being accused, other victims would not have come forward.
Well, you're referring to someone such as Stuart Hall, who's
and the point is that by naming somebody who is alleged to have committed a sexual offence, it gives confidence to other victims who might otherwise not come forward.
I don't think that's strong enough an argument,
given the scale of sexual abuse.
So you're saying two wrongs make a right?
No, I'm not saying two wrongs make a right. And I've said I agree it's a really complex and difficult problem, but I don't think we should just write it off, because there is a context in which sexual crimes go unreported, and we're not doing enough about that. And I'm worried about us saying, let's just focus on protecting alleged perpetrators when we're not doing anything about the fact that it's so hard for people to come forward.
Afua, you're right to say that the number of rapes has gone up a lot and the number of convictions has actually gone down. But I think the case of Sir Cliff Richard is an absolute shocker. And I mean, much as Lily Allen apologised on behalf of our country for the migrant crisis, I think that I'd like to say I'm sorry to Sir Cliff Richard on behalf of the BBC, because I don't think he's received an apology yet for the fact that he was his life was turned upside down, and he can never escape that tag.
I think just one thing, the BBC coverage, the fact that the BBC filmed a raid in real time from the general principle.
The reason we're talking about the BBC now is it is about Savile, because this was the BBC's last-ditch, Charlie come lately reaction to the fact that they got Savile completely wrong, and so they had to show that they were on the right page when it came to sexual abuse. So they went totally over the top on Sir Cliff. Just one more thing.
Sure, of course.
For example, that police raid on his house. Anyone watching it would think, how on earth are you going to find evidence in a house in Berkshire by the South Yorkshire police, who are already tainted themselves?
Hillsborough, just to remind listeners.
How will the South Yorkshire police find evidence 20 years after an alleged offence at a Christian rally in the 80s? It is a nonsense. And the idea that this is going to bring others to come forward is also a nonsense, and the BBC should have been ashamed of itself.
James, you wanted to get in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really passionate about this point, because everything I've read, what we're trying to justify is we're saying it is perfectly acceptable to humiliate and destroy somebody's life because we think it encourages other people to come forward. I'm sorry, I cannot accept that, because if you want to come forward, that's a separate issue. But are we sitting here today and saying that we're going to destroy this man's life? It's perfectly OK. He can never recover from that, but that just gives other people the opportunity to come forward. I think it's ridiculous.
I think what you're saying is really important, and for me, this goes to the root of the issue, right? There is no reason why...
this better be good.
Because listen to me. There is no reason why, because you're accused of an offence, your life should be ruined. I wish we had a country where we understood the presumption of innocence, right? Somebody who's been accused of offence is not proven guilty. We shouldn't be pillaring them. We shouldn't be destroying their reputation. We shouldn't be holding them up as an example of someone who's convicted. At the same time, I wish we lived in a society where victims were taken seriously. And this is important.
I think that's James's point.
Look at the Ched Evans trial. The woman who alleged that she'd been raped by Ched Evans has been absolutely paraded through social media and humiliated and degraded. And people don't seem to understand that if somebody
But she wasn't named, Afua.
No, I know, but I'm
you've
saying...
just demolished your own argument.
No, I haven't. This is one problem with public opinion. It's the same tendency that refuses to accept that someone accused of offence is not guilty, and also refuses to accept that somebody who doesn't find their perpetrator convicted may not have been lying. And it's the same thing. This is a nuanced thing. When someone's accused of a crime, there should be a process. We shouldn't be grading and vilifying anybody.
I've got a process, but I want to hear from Michelle first. I have got the solution, everybody. Don't worry.
What I think is what we've just been hearing about Cliff Richard broadcasting, raids on houses. I think that's disgraceful, because you're bordering on creating entertainment value out of something that's incredibly serious. So,
they interrupted the news.
Yeah, I think that's disgraceful. Whoever the person is, I think that's absolutely wrong, and it's gone too far. But I also think that you can't have total anonymity. I can't say that word. You can't keep them anonymous if you've been accused of something. Thank you. This took me a long time. Because in order to secure a conviction, you have to get enough evidence. To get the evidence, you have to open it up and say, this is what's going on. Has anyone else experienced this? But in the cases that you're describing here, it went way, way, way too far.
So here's my solution panel, and then I'll whiz around and see what you think about it. This is how I think you do. Let's say it's a case of Mr. X, who is a famous pop star, and somebody comes forward and says that he or she was inappropriately touched. Instead of going on a fishing trip, which is what they call where they throw names like Sir Cliff Richard and Paul Gambaccini and others out, the police then have to present to a judge, who is then precluded from sitting on the trial, The judge hears the evidence. If he or she is happy that there could be a case to proceed, then yes, the naming of Mr X will take place. Otherwise, presumption of innocence, Mr X will never know about it. So as long as a judge, even a High Court judge, is satisfied that there looks like a case to answer, then we can identify Mr X. Rachel?
I think it's better than the flypaper one, where you throw somebody's name out to the mob, and then you see who, you know, whether anyone else comes forward. Better, yes.
But better, not perfect. Yeah,
better.
But I think the judge should only be allowed to make a decision if there is, what do they say, beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah, OK.
You know, you can't just come forward.
But that's what a jury...
But that's too late. By then, you've destroyed the guy. What I'm saying is, before you shame the guy, make sure you've got a case to answer.
Well, isn't that where my judge comes in?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Michelle?
I don't see how it would work.
I'll just say, for those reasons, Nick, I'm in.
I don't see how that would
done.
work without having enough supporting evidence, and you would get that supporting evidence by opening it up. And
well, because you say we've got this fantastic... Look, we believe in this witness. Here are his or her witness statements. Please read them. Mr X makes a confession. He knows about... the victim knows about birthmarks on various parts of Mr X's appendage. We really feel confident about this. We're also picking up on quite a lot of rumours. We want to name Mr X.
So you've got almost a sanity... What you're saying is you want almost like a sanity check before it starts getting published.
The judge says,
OK,
I'm happy. Yeah, all right, name him.
Yeah, I kind of get your point.
First of all, that's what should happen to an extent before someone's charged. There has to be evidence before the police decide to charge anyway.
There has to be sufficient evidence.
I know what you're saying is a much higher standard than that.
Hasn't happened in these other cases.
I've got time for that as a suggestion, but
I've won today.
I just want to finish by saying my concern would be the message it sends to a victim that you are going to be scrutinised by a judge at an early stage to see whether you're right.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but let's talk about something different now. It's my turn. Theresa May has not ruled out paying billions to the EU to secure British banks access to the single market, and nor should she. In fact, she should guarantee it. The Prime Minister has assured Nissan that its Sunderland plant will be shielded from the impact of Brexit, and the same special protection should be given to the city. The UK's financial services sector, with the City of London at its heart, employs over 1 million people and paid over £66 billion in tax last year. We must defend these jobs and these funds from the blows that are sure to come from our departure from the EU. We're only beginning to see the economic reality of Brexit. Its rising food prices, a plunging pound and warnings about sliding living standards. British banks are essential to our nation's well-being, and if we have to buy their protection, so be it.
Now, we agreed about Brexit, but I couldn't disagree with you more about the banks.
OK.
Listen, so what you're saying is...
Good, Rachel.
Wait, Brexit doesn't mean Brexit. We can pick and choose what we want to keep, what we want to save, what we're going to have to pay for in order to keep sacred and money generating for the GDP of our economy, which is obviously the financial sector provides 11%. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense to say that...
so you want to see...
No, can I just give you some figures?
Just my blood's boiling again.
I know the city is the golden goose. No, but none of us want to see our GDP crash.
Which it will do.
The city doesn't have passporting rights. But you know what? I think if hard Brexit is going to apply to anybody, I want it to apply to the bankers. During 2007 to 2010, guess how much money the Treasury spent on the financial crash and supporting the banks? I'm going to tell you, 1.62 trillion.
Yeah.
That is equivalent to our entire national debt. OK, so what you're saying is, let's carry on spending billions and billions and billions in supporting
by the way, it's 7 billion.
This sector.
Yeah. 7
and everyone
billion.
Else can go hang. Our children...
Because that's the cost.
Let's save the bankers and everyone else can go hang and just
how do we get
make their own way in Brexit.
Remember, what was the tax figure we took in? Was
66 billion.
Well, hang on, if we can spend... how do you get that figure?
So that was from the National Statistics Office, the figure that Theresa May is suggesting the contribution we need to make is 7 billion, and that just the tax receipts alone, forget about the 1 million jobs that we're going to be saving, is 65 billion. So, to me, as a business, would I spend £7 billion to save 65? Difficult question, Rachel.
I'm sorry, but this is why it was stupid to vote Brexit. This is why Brexit was a terrible idea, and people who supported it were being idiotic, because we are dependent on the city and financial services. We are interconnected. We do live in a globalised economy. We need passporting. We need foreign transactions to happen easily. We have voted for something that's going to jeopardise that, and I think it's a massive shame, and it's going to cause huge economic problems. But I don't think we can just subsidise the city and get around it. Because
I don't care whether we voted or not.
We've got to live with the consequences of ridiculously bad choices
the bottom
that we've
line
made.
is, you're sitting here saying, let me see the risk of 1 million jobs, the one sector in this country that keeps our economy alive, keeps our health service, our police force, keeps the country ticking over. You're quite happy to sit there and watch it collapse.
Well, manufacturing is worth more to the economy than
But she just said she's going to save Sunderland, the Nissan plant. So I don't care what she does. What I'm saying
is... Who's next to be saved?
Sorry,
fruit pickers? I mean,
and if we can,
journalists?
Nick, if we can save the fruit pickers, we should.
James,
we've got to eat.
The people who led us out of Brexit, by the way, it's 1.162 trillion was spent on supporting the banks, not 1.6. Let's not fall out over a mere 0.4 trillion. But we were told that we would have a glorious future. Britannia would sail again. We'd on our own. Hey-ho for the open seas. We can do it on our own. We can't say all that and then spend £6 billion on the financial sector. The financial. It's like when the bankers said, we'll move to Zurich, we'll move to Frankfurt. I just think...
They won't go.
I think we should call everyone's bluff.
Can I just, Michelle,
let the city survive on its own.
Can I just ask, have you prepared 2 arguments for James? Have you prepared
No, that's what I genuinely...
Because I wonder whether it ran in the family.
Michelle, you're in business. You've probably got an intelligent view on this.
But I've also done what Afua describes as idiotic, which I don't like that sentiment, and that's the problem.
You voted Brexit.
I voted Brexit, and it frustrates me when people like you...
Do you regret
it? No, call it stupid and idiotic. We're all entitled to our own opinions. Most of us made those decisions based on our own reasons and research and all the rest of it.
Should we
bail
not
out the banks
again?
So my question to you is, when you say you want to pay billions, into what? What are you suggesting? You want us to be part of the EEA? What's your solution?
I think that what Theresa May is saying is, in order for us to have access to the EU by our banks, the cost of doing that is going to cost us £7 billion a year to do that. So the answer is simple. If we don't pay the £7 billion, the financial services sector does not access the entire European financial market.
See, I just... So when we talk about the banking sector, we're talking about the banking sector, that's quite a... The banking sector is various different subsectors, as you're going to know yourself. So it's not as simple as saying, when you say passporting rights are essential, they're not essential for all of the subsectors of the banking industry. They're not. So I don't know if you look at some of the insurances, for example, it's not. Is it essential for banking? Yes. Asset management? Yes, probably less so. Insurance? Less so again. So it's not a case of saying, we must have this, we must spend this money, or 1.1 million jobs are going to go. It's not as simple as that.
I'm not saying they're going to go, but why would I want to take a risk?
Because
why would I want to risk the sector in this country that we are dependent upon for our taxation? It's 11% of our tax receipts.
Yeah, but hang on a second, because when you actually look, I think it's insurance, it's something like 28% of the export in the insurance sector is EU-based. So this is a big... Saying that all this financial sector is so dependent on the EU, I'm not sure I necessarily believe that. When you say, why do we need to do this? We voted Brexit. Like it or loathe it, that's the situation that we did. And now what we need to do is figure out how are we going to do this. It's not just a simple
case. So you're just saying, let's just sit here and destroy our economy.
No, that's not what I suggested. What I suggested was stepping back, not bunching it all up and going, this whole banking sector. It might be an important sector, but it is a loathed sector by many people. This banking sector is responsible, in many people's eyes, for the crash in 2007 and 8. They don't like these bankers. To call Brexit voters stupid and idiotic is playing it, and then to say, let's talk about bankers and bailing them out. A lot of people don't like that industry. It's gone from an economic issue to a political issue, and people need to be very careful about how they're perceived going forward.
I didn't call Brexit voters stupid, but I did call it an idiotic decision, and I respect your right to make a decision that I disagree with. Of course I do, and I also agree with you. I think if you're going to vote for Brexit, which I think was a mistake, then you have to live with the consequences, and I don't think you can just piecemeal choose which industries you're going to support and which you're going to let fall apart. We have to live with the consequences of the decision we've made. I think it was a mistake. I think it's going to be destructive, and now we have to let it roll its consequences.
I'm honestly
Otherwise,
shocked,
we're sending the message that you can support anything and not have to live with the...
Why don't we just sit on the fence?
You've almost got me with your sums. The thing, again, in fact, your sums you have got me, I'll be honest, I didn't realise, and so well done with those. But What are we going to say when the tech sector comes along and they want to have special privileges, or the insurance that Michelle mentioned? If we do it for one... So in the end, we never did vote Brexit, and it's going to be an unholy mess. Surely you see that argument. You set a very dangerous precedent, James.
I think,
well,
Nick, I think that, you know, all I can tell you is, to me, running a country is like running a business. Lots of CEOs make mistakes, they make decisions that they regret. I think there is nothing wrong in sitting here today and saying we are now facing a crisis, that if our banking system doesn't work, we have to bail it out. Let me finish.
What if they ask what if they say, it's not 7, we want 14? Actually, we want 25.
OK,
you're a businessman, you know...
It's maths, isn't it? So if I'm going to risk 65 billion of taxation that I could see dwindling down, and I've got to plug 7 billion gap, I'd plug it. If I had agriculture and I've got to save those migrant workers because without them we can't eat, I would plug that out.
Running a country is not like running a business. If this were a business, you would never have left the EU in the first place, because it's not in your financial interest.
That is true, Afua. It's going to cost us 20 billion euros just to leave. And now we've got to add in the 7 billion we're going to be spending to keep the city sweet. It's an absolute joke. And then we're going to have 66 billion... lost to our revenues. The whole thing's a disaster. If this was a company, the CEO would reverse the decision or be sacked.
Well, he did, didn't he? He immediately resigned.
We're not going to agree, are we? So let's agree to disagree, I think.
Well, I'm going to agree with myself.
Yeah, there you go. Right, I'm after the break, telling you all what Pamela Anderson and I have in common. Parents, I've got news for you. If you have a teenager, it is highly likely they are getting lots of their sex education from watching porn. Sure, you may have grown up stealing a cheeky glance at a magazine or two, but this is a different league. Even Pamela Anderson, of all people, has been wandering around with a rabbi this week, warning of the dangers of porn. Boys and girls now have access at the click of a button to content that would make your hair curl. These kids are growing up with wildly inaccurate expectations of sex and their partners. They think the things they watch are how they too are expected to behave, and there is a major disconnect between sex and love. It's time to have a serious discussion about porn, and it may even be time to bring that conversation into the classroom.
Michelle, are you really saying that you're proposing that we show pornographic material to our 3-year-olds? Is that what you're saying?
That would be the most bizarre thing for me to suggest. Showing pornographic material to 3-year-olds would just be weird. So that is definitely not what I'm
OK, so let me just
suggesting.
get this right. So you're saying that in order to educate our children, that your strategy is to replace education with pornographic material?
Again, that's not what I'm saying. Do you want to go a third time?
I mean, I'm just, you know...
I'll go for a cup of coffee.
I'm completely baffled by your even thought process.
Right.
OK, so listen, the bottom line is you're saying that kids have access to pornographic material.
Yes.
So if they're going to have it anyway, let's now throw it in the classroom and encourage them. Ridiculous. If you want to educate kids, then educate them. Address it through the education system. You know, all your research clearly shows that most of the kids that get their education on sex, they get it through schools. I think in the last 12 years, the stats have gone from like 28% to 40%. So it's clearly working. If you have a problem, then focus on the delivery, the source of how we educate kids. But I can't imagine walking into a classroom watching kids watching pornographic material. Hello?
Right. What I want to do... Someone is definitely in. She is definitely in. I'm not suggesting bringing out catalogues of pornographic stuff and lining all the kids up, and I'm not suggesting that. What I'm merely asking the question, and I'm posing the question, children are watching porn, fact. They are watching it in alarming numbers. The porn that they are watching is getting worse and worse and worse.
So now let's encourage them.
Hold on. Their response and attitudes towards sex is getting massively influenced by the fact that they are watching porn. Fact. There is no critical conversations happening, no critical conversations about what is this kind of porn? Is this right? Is this wrong? Is this how people should be behaving?
Michelle, the word's called education, so let's teach them.
what we're going to do? Are we going to sit in a classroom and say, so children, let's just conjure up in our minds an image of pornographic movie. You know, let's
They've all
discuss
seen it, Michelle. You don't need to show it.
What age? Let's get some details. What age are we talking?
I would never do it until the final year. And by the way, I'm not suggesting we do this. I'm posing the question.
Yeah.
I would look to year 12, I think it is, so the latest possible year in the school, so certainly not 3-year-olds.
So 17.
I think it should be younger than that. I think, James, I think your reaction is a perfect example of the problem, which is basically that...
Oh, now it's my fault.
Yeah, it is your fault.
Oh.
We're all uncomfortable with the horrible reality that our kids are watching porn. It's horrible, but it's true. Like Michelle said, it's a fact. And instead of addressing it head-on, we're just digging our heads in the sand and just being like, as long as we don't give them any, let's just hope it might just go away. It's not going away. A quarter of 11-year-olds are watching porn. Half of 14 and 15-year-olds are watching porn. It's happening. And the real disgrace, actually, is that most of them aren't looking for it. Most of them are looking at other stuff online, and it's popping up.
Isn't the answer sex education? Let's improve it.
I think you're misunderstanding. And as Michelle said, it's not that we just give them loads of porn and say, just enjoy this. No. It's show them...
That's exactly what she said.
No, it's not what she
didn't
said at all.
that.
Well, and I would go further and I'd say, you asked the question, should we? I think we should. I think that we should. Obviously, very carefully chosen extracts from porn, which are deconstructed in a classroom in a responsible way so that children can analyse it, just like we let them analyse other literature and material. Because the fact is, when you talk to teenagers, and I've talked to so many teenagers about this, you talk to teenage boys about porn, you ask them what they think about the porn they've seen, and some of it is horrific. I mean, there's abuse porn, gang rape porn that is easily accessible online. They have said that it's influenced their behaviour, and often they say they thought it was funny or amusing. You speak to girls, they say they found it disturbing and troubling, and that they felt that boys have tried to do things they've seen in porn on them. Now, the idea that we would just let our children loose with these kind of images and ideas without countering them or giving them a responsible way to understand them, I just think that is a complete abdication of our responsibilities as adults. We need to grasp reality. It's happening. How can we equip them
I think Afua
to deal with
all
it?
that without actually showing visual images of porn. I mean, what Ched Evans said, to go back to him, was that he wanted to have more education around alcohol and sex and consent. And I don't think that actually... I think visual images are really influential. I'd much prefer to see a conversation about pornography introduced in schools. I think it was Jenny Murray, the presenter of Women's Hour, who said we should actually show porn in schools. And you saying, as if it's... and analyse it like literature. The whole problem is it's not. It actually really affects the way your brain and your sexuality develops. Porn is a fact of life.
It does if you just let children watch it unmonitored without any context.
Well, that is happening anyway.
But that's one of the things you can do. You can, if you show children porn, you can explore consent.
What kind of porn are you going to show them, Afua?
Consenting?
Nice porn? Why not show them childbirth videos, which would actually really ram the point home? This is the actual end result of sex.
Porn, there's a lot we could do. Our sex education at the moment is a disgrace. The government has voted not to make it mandatory. There are lots of children who aren't getting any adequate sex education at all. I mean, anything that would improve that, I would support.
Well, the problem
I
here
realise porn is an extreme.
We need to educate parents
There's a lot to what you say, Afua, undoubtedly. And I think maybe if you're going to do it, you need to do it at age 11 or 12. But I fear you'll have enormous divisions in the classrooms because there will be strict Christian parents, there will be Orthodox Jews, there will be Muslims who will say, you're not going to show my children.
How would it work in a
so then you've suddenly got a split classroom, which is even more difficult for the kids.
Well, that's already happening. A lot of religious parents are removing their children from sex education classes. So you're getting kind of, a two-tier system where some children are being left without any information.
That's even more dangerous,
That's a reason to make it mandatory, because at the moment parents can't opt out.
So override a person's faith?
It's not overriding their faith. As long as a child, as long as somebody's going to have sex one day, then sex education is an essential part of their training.
So you would say to an Orthodox Jewish family or Muslim family or really devout Christians, I'm sorry, we are going to teach your child about sex.
I think it should be mandatory in the same way as maths and English are mandatory.
So we don't respect their faith?
It's not respecting their faith. I'm not saying that we should teach them that you should have promiscuous relationships or that we should... I'm saying...
The Jewish man
in terms
or the Muslim woman will say, I will teach my own son or my daughter, thank you, about sex. You're not doing it.
And actually I know there's a group that does Islamic sex education, which tackles the really difficult stuff from an Islamic perspective. I respect that. As long as you're doing it, I don't care how you're doing it. You could do it in line with people's faith.
But isn't that the answer, though? Isn't the answer
let's see it happen. It's not happening
we've gone from 28 to 40% through developing sex education in schools by focusing on that point, and it's clearly working. What Michelle's really saying is, I'd like to see 40% to 75%. And if that means that because of the digital age, because of online, you know, these things exist today that didn't exist before, but our education system has not embraced some of those changes, and we need to change the way we communicate.
So how do we do that then? So what's your vision of, like, firstly, do you accept that the access that children have got to porn is it's damaging
yes,
their...
I do, 100% accept.
So how do you
So
suggest?
I think that right now, in schools, we are using teachers to communicate in whichever way they're using, you know, in discussions, in groups, whatever they do. Today, I agree with you that because of the internet, the world's changing, and we probably haven't incorporated...
So just tell me the quick answer.
So I would say address the fact that it exists. Yes, there is pornographic material, and we get to the heart of the abusive, you know, the things that we don't like. You can discuss them, you can share them. But I think playing a video, no, that...
A carefully selected video, not like a...
Which leads me neatly enough, excuse me, talking about carefully selected videos, and while we're on the subject of terrible things we've seen on the internet, Rachel Johnson, how do you explain this? And also, how do you explain you're wearing the same top? Have you only got one top, Rachel?
No, I've clearly done the walk of shame from my dinner with Ed Balls last weekend, obviously, in the same silky shirt.
Did you dance together?
No, I don't think we did dance together, but, you know, there we are.
Oh.
OK, panel, I've got a question for you. What's the real problem for women in the US election, apart from the obvious ugly orange one? Let's head to the US to consider this extraordinary conundrum. If only women voted, Hillary would win. OK, that's no surprise. She's well ahead in the polls anyway. But look at this. If only men voted, Trump would win a landslide. Every swing state would turn red. I'm going to pause now for you all to register your shock. In fact, some are arguing that the stories of groping and locker room talk are a sideshow to the main event, which is there's still a gender gap in politics. Men, in the privacy of the polling booth, will vote for Trump, a man. The return to the overt sexism of the past is hiding subconscious sexism and continuing gender bias against women in the present. I'm not saying all men are sexist, apart from you maybe, Nick, but maybe when it comes to having a woman as commander-in-chief, they're not as feminist as they think they are.
Just help me understand what you're saying. Are you saying that men will vote for Trump because subconsciously they don't like women? Or are you saying that men will vote for Trump because subconsciously they think the locker room talk is awesome?
No. What I'm saying is, according to a poll of polls, if only men voted, this is that Trump would win by a huge majority. So what this is actually telling us is that Trump is managing to appeal to something in men they're maybe not even aware of, which is that they want a white man in charge. They don't want to see a woman running the country as commander-in-chief. And this is the evidence. I mean, it's a complete gender split in the country. Men will vote for Trump. Women will vote for Hillary.
But maybe that's
Come on, Nick.
because...
I want some comeback from Nick on this.
Because usually... go first.
But maybe isn't that just because those people just agree with what he's saying and his policies, or they don't like Hillary Clinton?
I think she's saying it's because it's sexism.
It's this whole story that we've heard for many, many decades now, which is that men, in theory, are happy to have a woman on the board, but just not this woman. So when it comes to Hillary and who's going to be commander-in-chief, they're in principle happy, but in practice, when it comes to putting their vote in the box, they'll still vote for a man. And I'm talking about men. The evidence from women is they want a woman.
Well,
so this tells us that there is a bias against women in being in charge, in business, in politics.
If that was the case...
How can you counter that poll of polls?
Well, I was just going to run some names past you. Janet Yellen.
I know we have women,
Angela
but these
Merkel,
are the exceptions that maybe
Theresa
Cruz.
May, I agree she's not been elected, but she's got
Nicola Sturgeon. Of course, there are women who've made it to the top despite this, Nick.
I think you're basing your whole argument on a few blokes in the central states, who actually...
Did you see the graph?
Yeah, but if you look on the two sides, the east and west coast, you will see that was still playing pretty blue. There will be blokes in the deep south who think it's quite funny to talk in that way. But for you to decide, therefore, that all men, perhaps James and I, are fashioned like that and we like locker room talk, talk and would talk about
No, I'm not
women or
saying
girlfriends
that.
like that is
No,
actually
never
offensive
said-
cobblers. In
I
all
didn't
honesty.
say
yeah, you
that
are, and you're just
you
wrong.
were perpetrating locker room talk behind women's backs. What I'm saying is, according to this poll of polls conducted by Nate Silver, who is the pollster in the US, if
So there
you
are
did
three
it
blokes in
by men
Mississippi.
and
There are
women,
three
no,
blokes
they
in
didn't.
Mississippi.
There were 20
Rachel,
polls he looked
if you look
at.
at the success of Margaret Thatcher at that time, the number of people I spoke to, including myself, we were in awe of her because she was a woman and she was fantastic.
Good.
You know, I happen to be in recruitment. I deal with lots of organisations all the time. If I send a good woman who is talented and does the job, she is equally capable of getting that job. I don't believe that there's this sexist perception in men's head that just because she's a woman, we're not going to vote for her, we're not going to hire her. I think it's a bit backward
I don't know how you can
thinking.
contest that. I completely agree with you. If you look at the language in the campaign in America, I mean, Hillary, despite having been able to soldier on with pneumonia, instead of being described as incredibly strong and persistent, was described as weak because she had pneumonia. I mean, it was remarkable. All this talk of her being shrill and annoying, it's got really clearly sexist undertones. But I actually think, and I think what's interesting about this, I think there's actually a crisis of Western masculinity that's going on here. And if you look at some of the the right and the far-right movements in America, like the alt-right movement and the people who are coming up supporting Trump, they talk about America needing to be great again, about embracing masculinity, you know, all this dismissing of Trump's talk about groping women. They say it's just locker room banter. I think that there's something deeper happening for American men, that they feel emasculated, they're not secure in their masculine identity, and it's something that's really difficult to talk about. And, you know, they feel displaced by feminism, they're worried about women being their equals, taking over even. And instead of that manifesting in a reasonable, rational way, which of course these feelings never do, it's manifesting in this kind of, you know, we want the silverback gorilla, to use Nigel Farage's language. You know, they want this hyper-masculine, offensively masculine in his views about women and women's stories. In fact, we've got a clip of Michelle Obama really reminding us what is at stake here. I think we can play it.
And I have to tell you that I listen to all of this and I feel it so personally. And I'm sure that many of you do too, particularly the women. The shameful comments about our bodies, the disrespect of our ambitions and intellect, the belief that you can do anything you want to a woman. It is cruel. It's frightening. And the truth is, it hurts. It hurts.
I mean, this is what is at stake here. We're talking about Americans potentially electing a president who thinks it is OK to violate a woman. It doesn't get more serious than that.
Well, the prize for the biggest pile of ocean-going, copper-bottomed cobblers I've heard all week definitely goes to you.
And you're an angry white male, aren't you, Nick?
What is this?
I rest my case.
Yeah, here we get angry white male response.
Let me say, so
Here is the crisis of masculinity.
all the men who are voting Democrat, what are they then? Are they traitors to their sexuality?
Mitchell has very clearly portrayed evidence that if men were to vote without women, Trump would win the election by a majority.
But where do we get to this crisis? What is it, crisis of masculinity?
Yes. I actually said crisis of Western masculinity, because
so
it's all
just-
linked up with immigration and rapist Mexicans.
Just walk me through it. What's happening in Germany then?
What do you mean what's happening
Where
in
we've got
Germany?
Angela
In terms
Merkel.
of the right,
Yeah.
in terms of there being a massive resurgence in the far right and
we are
the
within
right.
touching. Let's be honest. After his disastrous performance in the debate this week, Trump is over. We can all accept that. So within touching distance,
I wouldn't be that complacent.
Can we park Germany for a second and Angela Merkel? Because I want to.
They're the most influential
It's a good
leaders in the
example.
bloody world.
America is
want
seeing
you
an
talking-
unprecedented resurgence in the right.
I don't want you talking about Angela Merkel and Margaret Thatcher when I want to talk about my topic, which is how Trump is appealing to the angry white male, the people who think that the Dixie flag should fly and there shouldn't be a chick in the White House. Michelle.
I just don't think it's as clear. Of course, that I think you either agree with somebody's policies and they resonate with you, or you don't, whether it's a man or a woman. And I don't know if I'm, like, missing something. I understand what you're saying. I understand the graph. I understand what you're showing. But to me, what you're saying is all guys would vote for Trump because
he's a man.
Yeah, because he's a man and they're sexist. Well, maybe they just agree with what he's saying. I don't understand.
It is quite curious, though, that if all men were given the vote, only men voted, they would elect Trump, when this high-risk strategy is
Such a
actually
generous
eliminating
view.
himself from the...
polls.
Of course,
Mitchell's not
I'm
making it
just
up.
talking...
Is the
And I
opposite
take it you
true?
believe
Is the
all the
opposite true
polls, do you?
then? Because
All
you're
the
saying
polls
if
never
only
lie.
women
Clearly.
voted, Hillary would
So
win
then
by a
it's-
landslide as well.
So then are you suggesting that women are somehow sexist or prejudiced towards women? I don't really... what
No,
you're saying
because
is-
in this election, when there's a choice of Trump and Clinton, if only women voted, I can't keep on explaining it.
What you're saying. I think that when you look at
When he got it,
policies, people would vote for Hillary, but because men who would have voted for Hillary, because she has more sensible policies and she's a more sensible statesperson, because they are biased by their prejudice against her because she's a woman, it's pushing them towards Trump. That's the only way I'm explaining it.
I think
He's
the
a
facts will
completely
speak for
hopeless
themselves because I think Hillary's going to win anyway. So I think your argument
But
is
women
purely
don't vote
academic.
for Hillary because lots of the stuff that Trump said is offensive to them. Not
Okay,
because
so Trump ran an incredibly sexist campaign that has backfired. Paddy Power is already paying out on a Clinton victory. On that note, well, one thing's for sure. The Donald is angry. It's not every day the leader of the free world tells you to stop whining. And it's tough to compete when the election's rigged.
These vicious claims about me are totally and absolutely false. I can't stand it. I don't stand it. I'm a set of rapist. Water, hate. I can't stand bragging when I'm in here. Cause you're crystal ball ain't so crystal clear. So while you sit back and wonder why, I got a skin dawn at my side. Oh my God, it's a mirage. I'm telling you all it's a push.
I'm going to be so grateful, bigly, when we don't have to see much more of that man on our screens. What do you think?
Yeah, it's
It's
over.
over.
Isn't it?
It's over.
He's
You know,
just
they're saying if we say it's over, then we only encourage Hillary supporters not to bother voting.
I know, they've all got to vote.
What, on the 28th of November, you mean?
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. And that's it from us from this week. In a week of all important debates, let us know which of us won the argument and who's the sore loser by heading to our Facebook and Twitter pages. See you next time.